Hey all, today we're very lucky to have a legend in the field of enterprise excellence on the podcast with us, Mr. Mark Deluzio. Mark played a massive part in creating and rolling out Danaher Business Systems, which is really one of the greatest examples of an excellence journey that's sustained a long time and a company that's kept pumping and performing year on year on year, getting better and better. Mark has kindly provided us a copy of the Danaher Business Systems principles, and you'll hear in this episode the part that played in really helping them lead out this excellence journey and sustain it for a long, long time. And this company's just continuing to get better. If you want to get hold of the principles that Mark provided us, go to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast website under resources. You can download it from there, get a copy of it. Let's get into the episode. This is a must listen to.
Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where we aim to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve and create enduring, high-performance, low-impact enterprises. Learn how to enhance morale, customer and purpose centricity, focus, and calmness. Learn how to create and sustain a culture of excellence at all levels of your organisation.
I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. Welcome to episode 154 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr. Mark Deluzio on the show with us today. Mark is a pioneer and legend of Lean, renowned for the work he did in the formation of the Danaher Business System. Mark is the author of the books Turn Waste into Wealth and recently the book Flatlined, Why Lean Transformations Fail and What to Do About It. Mark now supports CEOs and senior leaders from many of our largest enterprises all over the world transform their organizations. It's amazing to have Mark on the show with us today to discuss Danaher's journey and what he's doing now with leadership. Let's get into the episode. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Brad, thanks. Really appreciate it.
Oh mate, it's such a pleasure. I've followed your work as long as I have, and it's such an honor to have you on the show.
I appreciate
Mark,
it.
First question I'm keen to ask is, Danaher's journey is amazing and renowned. It still goes on today. I'm connected with Danaher companies and it still continues and achieves great things. But what originally led Danaher to start an excellence transformation that is linked to culture, linked to the Danaher values?
Well, it wasn't that way at the beginning. You know, there's the story and then there's the story, right?
Yeah.
And all we did, to start with, I was lucky enough in 1987 to take a position with Art Byrne and George Koenigsegger at a company called Jakebreak, which is where everything started at Danaher. We didn't know at the time this was going to turn into what it did turn into, but Jakebreak was what really started it was they were in crisis. Their patent or their product, the Jakebreak, went out, and we were lousy suppliers at the time. They had just bought this company from Chicago Pneumatic. And Jakebreak was a lousy supplier. They had people on allocation, long lead times, poor quality, bad service. And we sold to all the big engine OEMs like Cummins and Caterpillar, Detroit Diesel, Mack, and all these people. And it was at the time they were so arrogant that they actually had two major big executives from Cummins Engine sit in the lobby for over an hour when they came to visit us to talk to us about our service.
Wow.
They got up and left and went back and said, we're done. We're going to reverse engineer the Jakebreak. And they overnight took, basically a third of our business. So they were our biggest customer. They took a third of the business away. Okay.
Wow.
And that was a crisis right there. Secondly, the other OEMs came back, the Caterpillars of the world, and said, hey, if you don't reduce your price by 30%, we're going to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So think about a business that lost a third of their volume, and then the rest of the volume that remained came down 30% in price. Okay, that was the crisis. Okay, that we had that said, hey, we have to do something different. And at the time, George Koenigsegger, Art Byrne, Bob Pentland, our head of operations, were studying the Japanese Toyota production system. And long story short, they got Shingijutsu, who were 5 of the 10 top engineers at Ono, or that worked for Ono for 20 to 30 years, who created the Toyota production system, to come to the U.S. and actually work with our company. So we were the first ones to bring them here, here being in the United States. And then the rest was history after that. So that, and Jakebreak did some unbelievable turnarounds in terms of performance and everything else, but the thinking really had to change. went from a batch and queue operation to a flow and pull operation, so a lot had to change, but we had this burning platform. We had this crisis. So, I think we talked earlier about companies that are performing very well today, but have a lot of waste in their business. Those are hard to change because there's not always an obvious reason why they need to change, albeit though that there's a lot of waste in a lot of these companies. So that was what sparked the whole thing. And if it wasn't for Jake Brake, there probably would be no DBS.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so George Sherman came in 1990, and I was still in finance. I became their CFO. I invented now what we call lean accounting. And so I'm known as the father of that. And my first study mission, they sent me to Japan as CFO. And when I came back, George Sherman said to me, "What do you want to do with your career?" And I said, "Geez, I love finance, but I want to get into operations." Before I know it, I was running the Asian business team, which included Hino Motors and Mitsubishi. Hino is part of Toyota, so an unbelievable lesson there and experience, where I got rated 106 with 100% on-time delivery, 100% quality, no warranty, everything perfect. I was rated 106 out of 110 because the labels on my box were not always in the exact same place.
Oh.
That's how tough they are to work with, and they make you better, right?
Yeah.
Where the U.S. OEMs wouldn't even have looked at that as an issue, And when I argued about it, they said, "Deluzio, son, if you cannot guarantee the quality outside the box, how can you guarantee the quality inside the box?" So what they were challenging was my mindset, not the label, really. Yeah, they were using the label as a vehicle. They were challenging my mindset. You're not paying attention to standards on outside the box, and you're getting sloppy, and that's sloppy. Even though 100% quality. I mean, we did a 3P line. You couldn't make a bad product in our line, Brad. We worked with Nikao on that, the first 3P line in the U.S. with Hino engineers as well. But they said, no, not good enough. You're number 106.
Wow.
At least I beat 4 guys out,
Yeah.
That's a true story. And it's like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. And I argued like an idiot. I argued, well, I wasn't form, fit, or function. What are you talking about? They're no, Deluzio, you don't understand. You don't understand. It's about my mindset that they were challenging.
Yeah.
They didn't like my mindset that I was sloppy in that label.
Yeah. And that discipline, you can really hear that discipline through that. Mark,
it's all about that. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mark, with a lot of companies, there's a lot of companies out there in the world where they've had Japanese involved in their company and senseis, and then they've still gone backward. It's fallen over. But the Danaher Business System has continued on. What would you say is the main differences that's enabled, the Danaher organization to keep striving forward and not have the whole thing disappear that happens with so many?
Well, okay, so the Rails brothers, who are the 2 principal shareholders who started Danaher, Mitch and Steve, are actual converts in DBS, right? And I don't know the last CEO that's in place now. I never met him. Well, all the other CEOs I worked with and grew up with, Larry Culpy and one who's running GE, Tom Joyce, and all these other people, and the continuity in the C-suite was really key, right? And so that to me was one of the big deals where you weren't going to get somebody coming in with a different direction with the Danaher Business System, that they were going to continue to evolve it, but nobody's going to do an about face and say, well, we're not doing DBS anymore. We're going to do, Six Sigma or TOC or whatever. Yeah. You didn't have that issue. Where in a lot of companies you get that. Take Art Byrne when he left Danaher and went to Wire Mold. Art did an unbelievable job, and Art's a good friend. He wrote the foreword to my book, Flatlined, and he's one of the best lean executives in the world, in my opinion. Well, guess what? When they sold the company to Legrand, they came in with a total different view and just undid everything that they did at Wire Mold, and it fell down on them. I understand now they're trying to get back into where they were with Art's, where Art left it. But, that leadership is a big deal. And if you don't have continuity, then you won't have that consistency going forward.
Yeah, I can see that with that. But I guess it creates that calmness and that stability. But what part plays to continuity, Mark? Is it continuity of the culture of that team? Is it continuity of succession planning? What elements would you say are critical around that for people to think about in their leadership team?
Well, all of that's important, right? But the interesting thing is there's a very fine. So when you work in the DBS type of office, right? There's a very fine line, Brad, between what you dictate and what you don't. So I just had this conversation with one of my clients last week that if you try to dictate everything from corporate, you and I, let's say, can get together and come up with the best, perfect, most elegant, perfect solution, which we won't be able to do that. But let's just say we did. The fact that I am jamming it down your throat and not giving you any freedom to exercise your creativity means you're going to reject it right out of hand. So there's a human dynamic there that you have to set the lanes and what you want people to play, but allow them to play within these lanes, right? So those lanes that I think we did well was the principles of lean, as opposed to you have to use this form and all your boards have to look the same and that kind of thing. Because how does DBS, for example, grow? It's not immune to Kaizen either, and it has to grow. It has to actually get better, right? So I'll give you a real case study. George Sherman, who I think was perhaps one of the best CEO I ever met in my life. God rest his soul. He just passed away last year. George came to me one day and said, I worked for George for 9 years, and he was an unbelievable strategic thinker. And the just through osmosis, George was amazing. But he said, Mark, I just got out of our Cleveland operation, and then I went to Gastonia, North Carolina, and they're all used in different daily management boards. I go, okay, hour by hour boards and all that stuff. I said, so what's the issue? He says, well, I have to re-educate myself every time I go into a new factory. So I looked at George and I said, geez, I said, I didn't realize you were the customer. Yeah. And he laughed. He goes, okay, what do you mean by that? I said, look, George, I'm more concerned that the principles of visual management are in place. Abnormality detection, status at a glance, the ability to drive that into like a PDCA type problem solving, that we can solve problems with the data that we collect. I'm more interested in the principles of visual management as opposed to all the boards look the same. Yeah. Okay. Now maybe we dictate, hey, look, you got to measure safety, quality, delivery, and cost, and think about those priorities in that hierarchy. Maybe that's what we legislate, but we allow our companies to come up with their own approach. And that's how DBS grew in terms of all these new ideas. And they had the lanes in which they could play, right? I said, George, I'm not smart enough to come up with a one solution for everybody. For example, Gastonia, North Carolina made 1 million sockets a day. We had a company up in Massachusetts that made 2 periscopes for the Navy a year. Yeah. So good luck with that. Okay. How do you do an hour by hour board with 2 periscopes a year? Yeah. So I'm not smart enough to figure that out. And even if I didn't get their inputs and allow them to instill their creativity, then it's going to get rejected anyway. So I'd rather have the fundamental principles in place and hold them to that. So in that regard, I don't care if they use the back of a napkin or use some kind of big electronic, board or whatever. I'd rather have the principles ensconced as opposed to the techniques that don't work, because they won't use it if I legislate from the top what it has to look like. And who am I to do that anyway, right? So there's this really fine line that a top lean office has to look at in terms of where do you set those lanes, where do they play, and then you allow them to play in those lanes and make sure they hold to the principles. So that's just one example. So
that's huge, Mark. Like, I can really see that. I see some companies when they roll out one stock standard board, one stock standard this, and you just see people just rebuck. But you see some amazing creativity when people understand the principle and then create their own way within that. It sounds
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So how do you instill the creativity of your company to make everything better in that regard? And unless I'm the smartest guy in the world and I have all the answers, then it doesn't work. And it won't work anyway. So,
I guess, and Mark, am I right in thinking that when it comes to, I guess a lot of people listening understand the tools and techniques of lean and different areas. And it's like, well, what's the purpose of that thing? Like when you think about the swim lanes of it, it's like, well, what is the purpose? What is the principle of that? that thing for, and then people understanding the purpose, and then they can create their own way to enable that and to empower it. Is that the correct way of thinking?
Yeah, it is. It is, because even the tools themselves may be applied differently based on your business, right?
Mm.
So I'm not trying to down the tools. You have to be really good at the tools. But if let's say, for example, from corporate said, okay, well, here's all the tools of lean, and we have to implement these tools. And I'm going to come to your facility, Brad, and you're going to get rated on how you're doing on all these tools. Well, what if some of those tools don't matter to your business?
Yeah.
But you have to do it anyway, because you have to now go through the audit to get a good score, and your name's going to go up on some list, and you're going to get rated with everybody else, and it's like, well, geez, I just made you spend time and energy on something that may not matter to you, right?
Yeah, totally relevant.
Which is why I sort of detest assessments, and I was one of those guys that created an assessment at Danaher, and I look back now and I wish I never did it.
Yeah,
And
wow.
yeah, I really do, because I think it drives the wrong behavior. And if you argue, I was just with a client last week. They said, well, lean's not the objective, but then why are you auditing your company, your facilities on lean?
Hmm.
The next thing they said was the lean office, the corporate lean office, you're our customers. Well, then how does a supplier audit their customer? I never saw that in my life, where a supplier audits a customer.
Hmm.
So my comment to them, to their CEO, was, and it was a really good guy, I said, your plants should audit your lean office if they truly are their supplier. Okay, we've got this 180 degree backwards.
Yeah.
The suppliers shouldn't audit their customer if they really truly are a customer, right?
Hmm.
It's a whole. So that's just a concept and a philosophy that says, are you really? Is that just nice talk that they're your customer, but then you're going to tell them what to do and dictate,
Yeah.
and expect them to conform to your audits and to your norms? Well, then it doesn't sound like much of a customer-supplier relationship to me.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, Mark. That's an
Yeah.
awesome point. And it is a unique, well, not unique, but it is different thinking to what the general run is that I see out there and I'm part of. Mark, what on that, when you've got the Danaher Business System and you've got the swim lanes and you want to help the culture really understand the principles and, improve culture in the way that we go about that, what techniques have you seen work to reflect and review on a journey and to help get better and better and better? Have there been any different techniques you've seen or ways that Danaher did it? You'd be like, Brad, here's a great way to go about it. Or would you just say, don't even worry about it?
Well, it was interesting. People said to me, how was the Danaher Business System office held accountable? And in the 9-10 years I worked for George Sherman, he never, ever asked me, how much money did the DBS office save? How much? Because he made sure that the accountability for results was in the operations. Okay.
Mm.
However, our main export was building capabilities within the company.
Yeah.
So we never would go in and do something for somebody without making sure we're transferring both explicit and tacit knowledge, right? And that was really key. So people would ask me, well, what was the culture like at Danaher? I said, I don't know. Which one of our 200 facilities are you talking about? Because they all had totally different cultures. They did. For example, go down to Tennessee, and at 3:00, a lot of those guys during fishing season want to go out fishing, right?
Mm.
Up in Connecticut, they would work 90 hours a day if there was such a thing.
Wow.
Because they wanted all the overtime in the world. Okay. And so it's a totally different that's just one little example of how companies are different. So there really wasn't a consistent culture within Danaher, except for the fact that we wanted to make sure everybody aspired to the principles that we talked about, the principles of flow first and pull second, never push, of respect for people, of how we think about, problem solving at the lowest possible level. All those, the principles of just in time, the hierarchy of safety, quality, delivery, and cost in that order, and that we never compromise one for another. These principles were really what we tried to get behaviors to be attuned to, and that's how we wanted to think about our culture. But we did not want to go into a company and say, well, you have to change your culture.
Mm.
I mean, that's a big insult. It's like maybe evolve your culture to these principles, but not change your culture. I mean, geez, it's unique and it's yours.
Yeah.
There were no bad cultures. There may have been some bad leaders that we had that, persecuted people without thinking about the process. And that was one of our principles. And, interrogate the process, not the person. Because normally the people aren't there to make a bad decision or do bad work. They're working in a really bad process that you created.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you want them to perform in this monstrosity of what you call a process. And that's not fair. So they're doing the best they can. But do you give them the facility to make change, to do Kaizen? Do you give them the time to do it? Do you give them the training? Do you give them the resources that they're going to need? Well, if not, then how are you going to improve? So those are the kind of things we looked at in terms of getting companies to affect change.
Yeah.
If you're not set up to win, and so many people, Brad, so many companies have all these great slogans. We want to solve problems at the lowest possible level, but they don't do all the things I just mentioned. We are really all about career development, but they don't have a career development process.
Mm.
So at the end of the day, all of these slogans, these principles, if you will, if you don't have a meaningful way to enact them, all they are is slogans.
Yeah,
they are. They're nice things that you put up on your poster on the wall, and it looks good to everybody. But the employees are sitting there saying, "No, that's bull. That's not. They don't do that."
Yeah.
It might look good for you and me going in and saying, "No," but then when you just ask a couple key questions, well, how do you solve problems at the lowest level? And when was the last time you did that?
Mm.
And then all of a sudden you find the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
So these are all slogans unless you can put processes in place to make them happen.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's the kind of thing we always looked at is, are you walking the talk in this regard?
Yeah.
Or is it just a bunch of, nice posters that look good to Wall Street analysts?
Yeah.
That don't know any better. Okay.
So, I'm hearing in it that you've really got to understand the principles of what you're trying to achieve and the principles you're trying to bring forward with your excellence journey, whatever that may be. And then, there's a big part of it looking at the processes or systems around that, because without that, a principle or a value on the wall is it's like wallpaper that
it's
will
a big deal.
turn people off because they're just like, well, that's rubbish. I don't believe in that. Mark, am I also reading that the way that you help sites was then very much a coaching approach, training and coaching approach based on the principles, based on those systems? Is that how your team helped sites grow and get better?
Yeah, I kind of joke around and say that, we do exactly what I used to do when I was 2 years old. Just ask dumb questions, like at the end of the day, aren't that dumb? And one of the best questions you can ask is why? Why do you load that? Why do you do that? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And you keep asking why. So what we learned, which is really frustrating but very meaningful, is the Socratic method from the Japanese, where they would never give you the answer, but they would come back with 3 questions to your one. Okay, and so I knew darn well on Monday they could have told me the answer, and it would not been meaningful. But if they made me struggle with that question, I asked them, maybe at Thursday at 2 a.m, I'd wake up with the answer. And those lessons I still remember today. That they're ingrained in you now because you had to really struggle and think about it. And the meaning of that answer is really key, more so than the answer itself. So a lot of times we like to throw things out there. I'll give you one example. I was in India. I've been there now 3 times this year, and I'll go again in October. And I have a great client over there, right? And they make chrome balls, steel balls. Mm. And if you know anything about that, what they do is they take wire and carbon, it has a lot of carbon in it, and they put it through a heating machine. And what it does is it takes a slug and it actually cold forms the slug into a ball. Well, when the ball comes out, it has a lot of flashing around it. So the next process, it goes into this flashing machine where it grinds off all this excess material.
Mm.
So I went in there and said, well, your flashing operation is one big rework operation. No, you don't understand our process. Yeah, you're right. I said, but I need to ask you a couple questions. I said, one is, why are you taking off the flashing? Well, because we can't sell a ball with that flashing on it, and it goes to more processes later, right? It goes to heat treat and hard grind and all kinds of other things. So okay, but you're taking it off, right? Yeah. Well, why'd you put it on? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're taking it off, you're the one that put it on.
Yeah.
So why did you put it on to begin with?
Mm.
Well, I know you don't understand how this works. And okay, look, all I'm saying is, every time you walk by that flashing machine, I want you to see a big red flag. I would suggest you paint that whole machine red, okay? Because it's a big wasted operation right now. So anyway, to their credit, on my next visit, a couple months later, I went back. They said, Mark, look at this. And they showed me a ball that came off the header that was still not perfect, but it was near net shape. And they went and messed with the tooling and got this thing to be such that now the flashing only has to run 50% of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're saving 3% on the material cost, which turned out to be a very significant number on an annual basis for them, a big number, right? By saving 3% of their material cost, just by how they process the part in the header. And so all I did is lay out the challenge to them and said that flashing is a waste from processing. You're over processing, because if you had done it right to begin with, you would never have to take that material off.
Mm.
And they reduced the amount of material that had to be taken out by maybe like 80%. So it still had to go through the flashing process, but hopefully I can get to a point where we can eliminate the flashing altogether and go right into heat treat and then hard grind, so that's that's what we do. We ask stupid questions, know, and that's just one example of how this works,
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm guessing, Mark, at Danaher Business Systems, as a leadership team, you define those principles, and I know how you link them into your values too, to really tie it together. And then and I am assuming on this, I'm assuming you then had leadership that got to the top who really understood those principles and were quite skilled to then be able to coach as you went around sites and spent time with leaders. Is that true?
Yeah, it was, but it wasn't all pristine like everybody likes to make it out to be, because we had the bell curve of good leaders and not good leaders, and I'd say not good leaders, but people that sometimes didn't want to break out of their traditional way. Because you have to remember, any of these companies that you deal with, these leaders got to their positions of prominence because they were good at something.
Yeah.
And now you're coming in saying, well, in order for you to really progress, what got you here is no longer going to be what's going to get you where you need to be.
Mm.
And sometimes people have a really hard time with that, right?
Yeah.
So you're breaking out all these traditional thought processes that got you to be successful. So if I said to you, well, Brad, you got here because you were a really good engineer, let's say. But that's why you got there, because of your technical competence, not your leadership skills. Maybe you're a lousy leader, or because you were just successful in some kind of breakthrough, and technologically speaking. But now we have to rethink everything that we're doing. So you might have, for example, gotten into, let's say, a manufacturing role. I'll just pick on that for a minute, because you knew how to really make machines run, and you minimize your changeovers. And now I come in and say, you need to do more changeovers now.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? We try to avoid changeovers. Mm-hmm. No, but you need to do more, because your customers don't order all part A.
Yeah.
When you decide to make it, they order A, B, and C, A, B, and C, A, B, and C. So now you got to do more changeovers. And in order to reduce your lead times and your inventory and your working capital and your service and on-time delivery improve, you have to do more changeovers. Now, you can't if your changeovers are 16 hours. But again, I'll go back to India. In 3 days, we reduced their changeover on three key pieces of equipment by over 90%.
Wow.
In 3 days.
Yeah.
We went, we didn't quite get to single minute yet. One of them we got to 15 minutes, and But now they're able, through our model that we have, they're able to do more changeovers. Now, if they don't, all they did was reduce changeover and had a nice story to tell, but they're not going to operationalize the changeover to make a difference in the marketplace, right? So now, once I can reduce my lead time in that regard, you and I, on the sales side, can come back and say, all right, well, I've got a weapon now.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got the best lead time out there right now. We took a business in England. It was a new acquisition, and they made temperature controllers, and they were at 28 days lead time when we bought the company. And I said to the managing director, well, I think we can get you down to 3 days. And he goes, no, there's no way you can do that. And we're already better than competition now because they're at 35. And well, that's not to me, that wasn't a meaningful advantage, but he thought it was. So over the course of 9 months, we got down to 3 days, and we cellularized, and we one-piece flow, and we put some quality issues. And everybody said, well, you must have put a lot of inventory in. No, our inventory turns went from 3 to 18 in that time frame. Okay. And our on-time delivery went from, they were tracking 95% to customer promise date, but when we recalibrated the customer request date, they were down in the 30s.
Yeah, wow.
And that was one of the dictates that we had from corporate. Well, you can measure delivery all you want, but you got to measure to request date because that's how the customer sees you. Okay. So if the customer says, hey, geez, Brad, I want it from you on the 15th, and you say, well, no, we can negotiate the 30th, and you get it to me on the 30th, and you mark yourself green because you succeeded, I'm marking you red. I may just find another supplier that's going to get it to me next time on the 15th.
Yeah.
And so those customers that go away, you never know about. So unless they're, big OEM customers like Jake Break had. So this is where now when I go into a sales meeting and I look at a temperature controller, and where the only differentiator for mine versus Honeywell or Siemens is price, well, guess what? Now I'm a commodity unless I now can sell the fact that, look, I can reduce your working capital and give you this inventory in 3 days, not 30 days or 28 days or 35 days. And because my distributors are measured on GMROI, gross margin return on investment, where the biggest investment happens to be inventory, guess who they're going to give the order to?
Yeah.
Okay. And our volumes in that business went from 30,000 units to 110,000 units in 1 year.
Wow.
It's because we had the best lead time.
Yeah, that's huge.
So here's a case where I don't believe there's any commodity business if you can differentiate yourself in these other regards.
Yeah, it's massive. And Mark, within the conversation, we've spoken a fair bit about stability and leadership coaching and capability. Mark, what have you found has worked over the years to help get leaders on the journey and actually buying into the principles and focusing on systems along with that to bring them to life?
Yeah, when you say systems, you're really talking about enterprise, right? The enterprise success of a business. Well, I found, Brad, that a lot of our measurement systems and compensation systems do not support the things we say we want to do in that regard. So if those don't change, then we're always going to default back to the traditional functional success measures that do not, necessarily translate into enterprise success. So, and this was the whole reason why, I grew up as a cost accountant in manufacturing in my early career, and I was a pretty darn good cost accountant. But once I started learning the principles of lean, I started looking at the things that we did in cost accounting, and I saw they were providing all these dysfunctional behaviors. So if you don't change those behaviors or those measures, so for example, absorption accounting meant, hey, the more stuff I make, the more I can capitalize my costs into the balance sheet, into inventory, and my profits are going to look really good. Yeah. It doesn't matter that what I made can't be sold, because sooner or later I got to write that off. But it sits in inventory for 2 years, and hey, I got my bonus. What do I care?
Yeah.
Or purchase price variance as an example. What's the best way maybe to reduce your price on let's say on a raw material, is just buy a lot more. You get quantity discounts. Well, I bought 50,000. I only need 20,000, but I got a good price.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the purchasing guy never got measured, not because he got measured on purchasing price variance. We got rid of those measures. And now we looked at total cost of ownership. We looked at all kinds of different things. And so we changed the metrics to support the principles that we said we wanted to aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't change those metrics, you're not going to, especially when it's tied to compensation, you're not going to get you're going to keep fighting yourself all the time.
No, measures.
So that's a real big deal.
Yeah, measures drive behaviors, don't they? That is.
Well, again, I'll give you another real case study. Okay, one of my clients was down in Arkansas this time. I'm there with the CEO of the company, and they had all these plants all over the country, and we were in the one plant in Arkansas, and the CFO for the company and the CEO, you were walking, doing a plant tour, and I said, well, how do you pay people here? And they said, well, we pay people based on machine uptime. Oh, okay. So what we found out was they weren't changing over to the part numbers they should have been, because that would kill their uptime and their compensation and their bonus. And they also weren't doing PM. They weren't shutting down for PM, preventive maintenance. So you know what happens there, right?
Mm.
So I said to the CFO, I said, right in front of the CEO, I said, why do you compensate people based on machine uptime? He said, well, I have to, we have to get a return on investment on this equipment. We paid a lot of money for this equipment. I said, okay. And, I guess he skipped this part in accounting called sunk costs, but all right. I said, okay, well, so what I like to do, Brad, is always bring it back to real life examples. So I said to him, you just had bought a brand new car, right? You told me the other day you bought a Lexus, right? He goes, yeah. That's a good choice, by the way. It's a good car. I said, they're expensive, right? He goes, yeah, they're kind of expensive. All right. So when you go home tonight, I said to the CFO, are you going to drive your car around the block 100 times to get utilization out of it? Well, why would I do that? I don't know why you would do that, but you're doing it here with your equipment. Why are you doing it? Why wouldn't you do it with your own automobile? And he goes, I never thought about it that way. So we don't live our lives the way we do run businesses because of the measures that we are looking at. So he's really focused on this ROI thing. I said, well, how do you take ROI to a bank? Because what they were losing business because they weren't delivering, because they were making all part A when they had orders for B, C, D, and E.
Yeah.
Okay. They were building excess inventory, which is a cash drain on the company. They weren't looking at the right measures, right? They were looking at ROI. And I said, I have no idea how you take ROI to the bank and cash it in. I have no idea how that works. And I'm an ex-finance guy, so I could, talk that way. But I said, why don't you be looking at, on-time delivery and growth and shorter lead times and being more flexible with your equipment, as opposed to running the heck out of your equipment to get some kind of, academic, pedantic ROI number, which means nothing, right? And he looked at me and said, we never thought about that way. But I said, just do it with your car. You run your car around the block 100 times tonight.
Yeah.
And see how that works out for you.
It's a great story. Like, it's so true, isn't it? But the measures that we've got in industry just drive some crazy behaviors, don't they?
Dumb behaviors. And a lot of it has to do with the finance group that instilled all this thinking. The traditional accounting, you go back to the early days, and it just promotes the wrong things, So that's one of the answers to your question, is the measures that we have and how we're compensated needs to really be affected and changed.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I've seen it throughout my career too, Mark. And I love your approach of the coaching approach to actually help shift it and apply it to real life examples to get people to think. Mark, within this journey you've had in your career of, back with Danaher Business Systems and really getting sustainable journeys going that sustain based on, we're talking about, continuity of leadership and leadership, understanding the principles and leading the principles, getting the right processes and systems going and the right measures happening to drive behaviors. What would be your 2-minute enterprise excellence tip in this area of expertise? If you had a big elevator lift going up with a senior leader, a CEO, what would be that tip you'd give them if they're just starting off on this journey or just want to start heading down the path?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's very simple. So many executives say to me, I got to change our people's behavior. Okay. And what really has to happen is they first have to change their behavior. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is, well, is it only you that don't need to change? I'll say that to a CEO. is it you? Because, in a lot of cases, the behaviors of the organization are reflective of the leadership, right? In terms of what they expect and all this. So if you keep driving a productivity number without looking at the drivers that drive productivity, then people are going to do dumb things to optimize their productivity, right? But they'll compromise the rest of the organization in that regard. So the first question is, what are you going to do to change your behavior? And let's remember that the processes that you have within your company are reflective of you and your leadership. Okay. So if you've given your employees a bad process to work within, or no process at all, because I have I have 10 rules of a process. The first rule is if it's not documented, you can't call it a process. Okay. How many times have you seen, I'm sure you have, Brad, when they say, oh yeah, we have a process to do value selling. Oh yeah, can you show it to me? Oh, we don't have it written down. We just kind of know how to do it because we're sales guys.
Yeah.
We're born with this, right? Everybody's born out of the womb with this ability to value sell, right? And well, you don't have it written down. So you got 40 sales guys, and how are you going to make sure everybody is consistent in that regard? No, we just know how to do it.
Man.
So, so that's the first rule of my 10 rules of a process. But the thing about it is, though, what do you see, Mr. CEO, going to do differently? Because it's got to start with you. If it doesn't start with you, then it's not going to work. So, if you expect everybody else to change, tell me first what you want them to do differently, and then let's go back to talk about you.
Yeah.
And starting with, did you make your bed today? Did you clean your room? Starting with your own Kaizen yourself first before you Kaizen the rest of the organization. And if you make those changes as a leader, it will radiate in spades to the rest of the company. So that's kind of how I think about it. So
yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
And it's simple, but it's not easy, is it? Like
no, it's easy to talk about, but to get somebody to actually do it is a whole different game.
Yeah.
Because remember, again, their success was all predicated on all the things they did to get there. Now you're trying to say, no, not all those things are going to work.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard sometimes. And so not everybody can do it.
I think too, Mark, and I know you're doing a lot of this now, like a CEO drawing on a coach, because often CEOs too, it's lonely, they're there by themselves. Who's there to be a sounding board? Who's there to help them? A lot of boards don't play that role. A lot of boards are just beating them up on different elements. So I think the role that you're now playing with CEOs around the world is a powerful one, because it's a lonely job.
It is a lonely job. It's exactly right. And, it's interesting. I was on the board of directors for a New York Stock Exchange company, and 11 board members all have 11 agendas, right? So everybody had their view of how leadership and management should run the company. And it was interesting to see how all that worked. But when you really look at the leadership of a company and the changes that they have to make, it's not easy. It's just not easy at all, because they have their paradigms and their view of the world about how things have to be. And again, their success, their lofty success in these roles, it's like, what do you mean I have to change? I'm the answer man. And one of the big changes that we really shoot for is getting leaders at any level to ask the right questions, not feel compelled to give the answer. Because the further you are from the action, it's an inverse relationship between the quality of your suggestion. Okay. Yeah. So, and it really is, as a matter of fact, Toyota had a notion that said that if you have not observed the problem, you are not allowed to opine on it. You have to physically, personally observe the problem. You're not allowed to opine on anything. And so just think about all the meetings you've been in your career and that I've been in, and how many meetings you wouldn't have had if you followed that rule. Because everybody has the answers, right? They want to give everybody the answers. And I was interesting. I was with a client not too long ago, and the managing director came in and started giving the team the answers, right, as to what they should do. It was a Kaizen team. He just walked in the middle of it. No, that's not right. You got to do it this way. I pulled him outside and I said, hey, look, let me tell you something. How many years have you been here? 25? And all of a sudden you have the answers today on this date. You all of a sudden have the answers to the malaise that these guys are trying to fix.
Yeah.
You need to stay out of this.
Yeah.
You don't have the answers. and you need to let them kind of do their thing. Yeah, they might make some mistakes, but you know what? Whatever they do is going to be better than the last 25 years that you were here running this thing.
Yeah. And
So
they'll learn and grow.
so allowing the teams to make mistakes and allowing them to kind of have the freedom and the tools and all that other stuff to make change is very important. And a lot of CEOs want to give the answer because they think they know.
Yeah.
And the tough part is you actually have to know how to ask the right questions and not feel compelled to give the answer, because quite frankly, you probably don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would be doing it already, and we wouldn't have need for, let's say, that Kaizen, right?
No, we should be back down on the floor making the stuff.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We would be here talking. You wouldn't have me in here anymore if everything was swimmingly well, right?
No.
So and so the higher you go, the more I found the quality of the answers are diminished quite heavily.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time and knowledge, mate, and everything you have done and continue to do, especially focusing on such a key area. Mate, how can people get hold of the books or reach out to you if they want to connect?
Well, they can get the books on Amazon. They can go in and get Flatlined and on Amazon. And then I've got a podcast called lean911.com. And I think you guys got 911 in Australia, don't you?
Oh, we got 000, but it's our equivalent of 000.
Oh, it's 000.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, mine's Lean. Oh, I should have thought of that. Lean911.com, where you can go. And what I do is I do these, these short podcasts about different subjects of things that don't get talked about a lot. Like how to use really use tack time. I can give you the calculation, but that's like giving me a set of golf clubs. I don't know how to really use them, right? And so, by the way, that's a bad subject. I shouldn't have brought that up. But I talk about the tacit stuff about the issues with how do you think about capital equipment in a lean environment. I have an episode on that. I have 3 right now on running a Kaizen. There's a 3-part series. It's probably going to turn into a 10-part series because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
So I got all these different subjects called lean911.com. You can download them. They're on Apple Podcasts and all that good stuff. My website's leanhorizons.com. You can go there. And that's about it. So, and then the YouTube channel for Lean Horizons as well. I have a lot of YouTube videos and webinars that I've done, and people can get that. So I really want to make sure, Brad, that, so I was Nikao from Shingijutsu was a disciple of Ono directly, and he made me promise I dedicate my life to teaching the purity of Ono's lean system, right? And I never met Ono. He died actually the month I was there, first time in 1990. He died in 1990. So I never got to meet Ono, but these guys that we worked with were his direct lieutenants, and I am very dedicated to making sure that the purity of lean is left behind when I leave this earth. And one of the problems we have right now is that the consulting industry has so many different flavors because everybody wants to become the next Deming or the next Ono. Okay. Yeah. And they want to take stuff and repackage it and rename it. And I'm a very basic guy. You work on the basics and they work. They're not sexy, but they work. Okay. Yeah. And I really do want to make sure that the purity of what we, not to say it can't be improved, but the purity first. People say, well, Mark, what's after lean? What's after lean? I mean, Toyota's been doing it for 80 years. Why don't you ask them?
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe, where's your standard work combination sheet? Oh, we don't have that. Oh, really? Well, geez, it's one of the things on the bottom of the Toyota Production System house, standard work. You don't have standard work? And you're asking me what's after lean? Yeah. How about go back and do Kaizen and put standard work in?
Yeah. And
then maybe we might talk in about 20 years if I'm still alive. Okay. It's like, what's after lean? You haven't even scratched the surface yet.
Yeah.
You're not even in nursery school, and you're telling me what's after lean?
Yeah.
That's the mentality. Everybody's looking for that silver bullet. There are 0 silver bullets out there.
No.
None.
The 1%ers and the getting all the fundamentals right. That's what makes you perform, just like in
fundamentals,
sport.
You're absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny because we may not play internationally, but we have the Green Bay Packers is a very famous football team in the NFL, National Football League, and the Lombardi Trophy is named after Vince Lombardi.
Yeah.
And he took these this broken down team, and his first practice he held up a football, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen, this is a football."
Mm.
Okay, Then from there, he went on the basics of all the fundamentals, like blocking, tackling, passing, and all that.
Yeah.
And he won all these championships. He was the greatest coach in history.
Yeah.
And he focused on the basics, right?
Yeah.
And, and I got to believe, by the way, I had a chance to attend an Australian rules football game in Adelaide, which was kind of cool. And I got to see your guy Walker there.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a cool sport. But, I was trying to look at that game from that respect and say, are there basics here that these guys are following, And it was interesting. Some of the guys did not kick a goal because maybe they weren't the guys to do it. So they passed it,
Yeah.
And they might have passed it further around the circle out, and somebody would kick it because they had the skill set. They played as a team, and they killed Perth. Oh my God, it was a massacre. But but I enjoyed that game, and I was looking at it from that respect about the fundamentals and the little I know about the game.
Yeah, there's a famous coach, Lee Matthews, that really helped Fitzroy Brisbane achieve a lot, and he was having a game plan, everyone knowing their part and playing their part to the standard, literally down to the millisecond, on different routines and processes. Yeah.
There you go. Right. It's that excellence, and if you look at, just take swimming. I swim for exercise, right? It's a great sport and it's a great thing to do for your body, but in your mind. But if you look at a world-class swimmer versus a competitive swimmer, there's a big difference in the discipline. You mentioned discipline earlier. The discipline involved in becoming world-class. Most companies are in the competitive range or below, but very few can really be that excellence, right? That real excellence that talks about all those small little details that you talked about, and those are the companies that become world class,
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say, I'll leave you with this, is that my first trip to Japan, two things was told to me that were so instrumental. One was, I asked the Japanese at the Toyota City, Japan, how is it that you can allow all your competition, Ford and GM and Chrysler and, Ferrari, all these different companies into your factories? And what they said was, what they need to know they cannot see.
Yeah.
Which you're talking about, the stuff that you were talking about earlier in terms of the intangibles, the culture, the behaviors, and the second thing they said was the difference between a world-class company and one that's not is their ability to solve problems.
Mm.
He said, even the great Toyota has problems, but we only solve our problems once.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was because most people masquerade problem fixing for problem solving.
Mm.
Like, for example, I was with a company that a PC board went out in one of their pieces of equipment. So now it's like, oh, we don't have the part. We have to get the part. Hey, Joe, when's that part coming? It's coming at 2:00 tomorrow. Okay, great. Let's get the machine up and running. And they think they solved the problem.
Yeah.
No, they didn't. They didn't look at the underlying processes to, why did the board go out and you didn't know about it? Do you have some kind of PM routine that board's got to change on a frequent basis? Can we put IoT devices in to sense a hot board and change it out before it blows? What's our PM on that machine, which they didn't have? So they think that fixing the broken circuit board in that equipment and getting it back running was their version of problem solving. And I'm telling them, no, it wasn't.
Yeah,
that was problem fixing, right?
Yeah.
So there's a big difference here in terms of mindset. It's one of the other mindsets that you talked about. And, so that really resonated with me when he told me that. Those two things were worth the whole trip.
Oh, that's awesome. Mate, the things you got to experience, but also the knowledge that you share now, Mark, yourself and who you're helping is so impressive, mate. And thank you for your time, mate. And thanks for helping us create a better future, mate. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. I look forward to getting to know you better. And if there's anything else we can do in this regard, then let me know. And be happy to pop on here and do that. So
thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it, mate. Cheers.
Okay, Brad.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
What a great episode. Remember, you can go to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast website under resources and get hold of the Danaher Business Systems principles Mark has kindly provided us a copy of, together with all the backlog of all the resources guests have given us over the years, which is becoming an amazing trove of knowledge and information. There were two key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, power of defining principles of excellence, and then coaching to this ongoing as leaders. Mark defined that so simply, but it's so powerful, that process, being clear on what are the principles of the organisation when it comes to excellence or enterprise excellence. the whole way we operate? And how do we crank up leadership capability to coach this ongoing into the future so that we constantly get better in this area? Sounds so simple, but it's not easy, as it requires habit change, which you can listen to the last episode from Dr. Mark Williams on to get extra insights. The second key takeaway for me was creating your own way in excellence and linking this to culture like Danaher did. I love this approach. I've seen it be successful so many times and really help organisations sustain excellence journey and really transform rather than be a sugar high that disappears. Thanks again for your time, Mark. I really appreciate everything you have done and will continue to do to help us create a better future. Bye for now.